Hey, what's up, guys? About a month ago, I did a breakdown of Eleanor Hill's testimony. She gave two opening statements dated September 18, 2002, before the joint inquiry. Um, I did a breakdown video of the morning session. This is the afternoon one, so let's see what she has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I forget, I do want to ask that we have two versions of this statement. It's the same statement, but we have two copies, one of which has been signed and certified as releasable, cleared for public release by the chair of the declassification working group for the intelligence community, and each page has been initialed by that individual. And the second copy that I would also like to make available and part of the record is a similar copy that was signed and certified by the representative of the Department of Justice and initialed, indicating that they agreed and concurred that it was suitable for public release because, as you know, the Justice Department has some litigation concerns, ongoing cases. So I'd ask that those be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to appear here today to advise the committees and the American public on the progress to date of the Joint Inquiry Staff's review of the activities of the U.S. intelligence community in connection with the September 11th terrorist attacks on the United States. As the horror and sheer inhumanity of that day engulfed this nation, all of us struggled with shock, with the utter disbelief, and the inevitable search for answers. The questions, if not the answers, were obvious. How could we have been so surprised? What did our—
Well, that's funny. Some people within the intelligence community shouldn't be surprised. The warnings were there, especially in the lead up to the fall of 2001. So I'll just leave it with recent times. So you had warnings that went back in the mid-90s. But in the year 2001, I mean, you had many countries in Europe, in the Middle East even, that were given warnings that the United States was going to come under attack by Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And the misconception is that because this is the excuse some of the intelligence services gave here in the United States, was that they were woefully unprepared. But when you look at the evidence, according to just the intelligence gathered, especially from the FBI, much less the CIA and the NSA, who much of that information is classified still. But even then, I mean, there were warnings all throughout the year 2001 in the lead up to the attacks of September 11, 2001. It wasn't some surprise, as you would think, Eleanor Hill, maybe on the date itself, because most people didn't know the date. I'm not going to go as far to say that the CIA or Israel or the NSA knew about the date, because we really don't know for sure. But don't give me this excuse that it was a surprise attack. Come on, man. You know, there were warnings about these guys using planes as the weapon, going all the way back to 1996. When Philippines investigators tried to warn the FBI, hey, we just interrogated one person who was involved with the Bajinka plot, which was to bomb 12 airliners with bombs, and that there was a secret second phase of that plot where they were going to hijack 10 airliners and crash them all inside the United States, starting with the CIA headquarters in Langley, Sears Tower, Pentagon, U.S. Capitol, World Trade Center, and Golden Gate Bridge. There was a number of these operatives living inside the United States even. That's the mid-90s. Ken Williams, who wrote the infamous Phoenix memo regarding terrorist sympathizers in Arizona. Zachariah Subra, who was a fanatic for Bin Laden. And basically, this is where Ken Williams went to interview him and said, hey, we got to keep an eye on this guy. FBI superiors basically ignored these warnings. And I could go into Robert Wright Jr. from Volga Betrayal, which was an FBI operation involving Hezbollah and Hamas in the United States. Mark Rossini and Doug Miller's pre-warnings about, well, they tried to warn Washington, but they were not allowed to by the CIA to share that there were two Al-Qaeda operatives who were involved with the U.S. skull bombing inside the United States.
Our government, especially our intelligence agencies, know before September 11th, 2001? Why didn't they know more? What can we do to strengthen and improve the capabilities of our intelligence agencies?
Hey, listen, I don't want to hear that. They knew enough. Okay. You guys should have done, I'm not saying you, Eleanor Hill, you're the staff director. There were warnings all throughout 2001. Okay. What they could have done, knowing that airliners were the target, they could have had stricter security measures. They could have had also stricter security measures when it comes to the immigration status, certain people from certain countries. But no, the State Department didn't want to insult their allies in Saudi Arabia. And so they had a program called the Visa Express program, where hundreds of applicants were coming through all throughout the last 2 years when the program existed, and they were given a fast track to enter the United States without any real strict background checks. And that's why a lot of these muscle hijackers involved with 9/11 got inside the country.
And as a result, help save ourselves and our children from ever having to face this again. On February 14th, 2002, the leadership of these two committees announced their resolve to come together to find credible answers to those sobering but critically important questions. The committees joined in an unprecedented, bicameral and bipartisan joint inquiry effort to meet that challenge. To conduct the review, the committees assembled a single staff that we call the Joint Inquiry Staff of 24 highly skilled professionals with experience in such areas as intelligence collection, analysis, management, law enforcement, investigations, and oversight. My testimony this morning is intended to address the inquiry's initial task, which was to conduct a factual review of what the intelligence community knew or should have known prior to September 11th, 2001, regarding the international terrorist threat to the United States. I caution that the inquiry remains a work in progress and that we may be developing additional relevant information as our work continues. That being said, we feel it is important to share with the American people through these hearings what we have found through our efforts to date. Let me briefly describe the way in which we have approached this review. We decided to target our search on categories of information that would most likely yield any intelligence material of relevance to the September 11th attacks. Specifically, our teams requested and reviewed from the intelligence community agencies these categories of information. Any information obtained before September 11th suggesting that an attack on the United States was imminent and what was done with it.
Okay.
Any information obtained before September 11th that should have alerted the intelligence community to this kind of attack, that is, using airplanes to attack buildings and what was done with it. Any information obtained before September 11th about the 19 dead hijackers and what was done with it. And any information obtained after September 11th about the hijackers and their backgrounds, including their involvement with Al-Qaeda, entry into this country, and activities while in this country, as well as why they never came to the attention of the United States government. And I would point out on the issue of the hijackers that we will not address that this morning, but we do intend to have an additional statement at subsequent hearings that are focused on that issue. As part of its review of the evolution of the international terrorist threat against the United States, the Joint Inquiry Staff produced a chronology that begins in 1982 and ends on September 11th, 2001. And that chronology, I believe, has been reproduced and handed out and is also depicted on these charts here in the room this morning. And I would request that the chronology also be made part of the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
The chronology notes significant events in international terrorism, significant counter-terrorist actions that were taken by the U.S. government in response to the threat, and information received by the intelligence community that was potentially relevant to the September 11th attacks. The chronology underscores several points regarding what the
Well, what happened there?
intelligence community knew about the international terrorist threat to the United States and U.S. interests prior to a September 11th, 2001. And these are those points. September 11th, while indelible in magnitude and in impact, was by no means America's first confrontation with international terrorism. While the nature of the threat has evolved and changed over time, it has long been recognized that United States interests were considered prime targets by various international terrorist groups. In response to a number of terrorist attacks on U.S. interests abroad during the 1980s, the U.S. government initiated a focused effort on terrorism, against terrorism, including the establishment.
By the way, that started with the Abu Nidal organization. And my fantastic co-researcher, DJ Thermal Detonator, he actually is one of the best in regards to secular Arab terrorism of the 1980s, and that's the Abu Nidal organization, in which there was a number of terrorist incidents that were happening not just on U.S. interests, but also to on U.S. interests, but also to Israel, Germany, and other countries. He was a contract killer. He wasn't an international demagogue, like a religious pacifist, like Bin Laden was. Where Bin Laden had a lot of money behind him. Abu Nidal did not. So he was basically like a contract for hire.
The Director of Central Intelligence, William Casey, of the Counterterrorism Center, or CTC, at CIA headquarters in 1986. In 1996, 10 years later, the FBI created its own counterterrorism center at FBI headquarters. Both in terms of attempts and actual attacks, there was considerable historical evidence prior to September 11th that international terrorists had planned and were in fact capable of conducting major terrorist strikes within the United States. The 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, the subsequent discovery in 1993 of plots to bomb New York City landmarks, and the arrest in 1999 during the millennium of an individual with al-Qaeda connections intending to bomb Los Angeles International Airport.
Went right over 1996 in the Bajinka plot. I wonder why.
Should have erased any doubts.
And that's where the idea of 9/11 came from, right? And they had two major co-conspirators involved with that, Ramzi Youssef, and this is where the 9/11 1993 connection comes from. Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind 1993 bombing, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was allegedly the mastermind of 9/11. He's the uncle to Ramzi Youssef, also known as, his real name is Abdul Basit Karim.
To the extent they existed about that point. From 1994 through as late as August 2001, the intelligence community had received information indicating that international terrorists had seriously considered the use of airplanes as a means of carrying out terrorist attacks. While this method of attack had clearly been discussed in terrorist circles, there was apparently little, if any, effort by intelligence community analysts to produce any strategic assessments of terrorists using aircraft as weapons. Osama bin Laden's role in international terrorism came to the attention of the intelligence community in the early 1990s. While bin Laden was initially viewed as a financier of terrorism, by 1996, the intelligence community was aware of his involvement in directing terrorist acts and had begun actively collecting intelligence on him. Bin Laden's own words indicated a steadily escalating threat. In August 1996, Osama bin Laden issued a public fatwa, or religious decree, authorizing attacks on Western military targets in the Arabian Peninsula. In February 1998, bin Laden issued another public fatwa, authorizing and promoting attacks on U.S. civilians and military personnel anywhere in the world. Following the August 1998 bombings of 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa, intelligence community leadership recognized how dangerous bin Laden's network was. In December 1998, Director of Central Intelligence George Tenet provided written guidance to his deputies at the CIA, declaring in effect a, quote, war with bin Laden. While counterterrorism was a resource priority from the time of the DCI's statement onward, it was competing with several other intelligence priorities, such as non-proliferation. Despite the DCI's declaration of war in 1998, there was no massive shift in budget or reassignment of personnel to counterterrorism until after September 11, 2001. By late 1998, the intelligence community had amassed a growing body of information, though general in nature and lacking specific details on time and on place, indicating that bin Laden and the al-Qaeda network intended to strike within the United States. And concern about bin Laden continued to grow over time and reached peak levels in the spring and summer of 2001 as the intelligence community faced increasing numbers of reports of imminent al-Qaeda attacks against U.S. interests. In July and August 2001, that rise in intelligence reporting began to decrease, just as 3 additional developments occurred in the United States: the Phoenix Memo, the detention of Zacarias Moussaoui, and the intelligence community's realization that 2 individuals with ties to bin Laden's network, Khalid al-Midhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, were possibly in the United States. The 2 individuals turned out to be 2 of the 19 hijackers on September 11th. The intelligence community apparently had not connected these individual warning flags to each other, to the drumbeat of threat reporting that had just occurred, or to the urgency of the war effort against bin Laden. Our review to date provides further context for each of these points, and my written statement addresses in great detail each point. For purposes of this review, I'm going to focus not on the historical sections, but rather on our review of more recent intelligence reporting.
Let me bring this up too, okay? So you heard all this from Eleanor Hill. Now, this is rather a conundrum for especially for the CIA, and more notoriously, the NSA, because the NSA had 2 monitoring lines, and that is the bin Laden satellite phone and the al-Qaeda communications up in Sana'a, Yemen. And they were listening to those phone calls for years, 6 years prior to 9/11, okay? The CIA and the NSA, they collected a massive amount of data. And basically, I mean, what do you think they were talking about on those phones, right? We're not dealing with people who talk about the trivial aspects of life like Americans do. Baseball, entertainment, and whatnot, right? These guys are serious people. And basically, they're talking about operations, most likely. And if operations are known to the intelligence apparatuses, that means that the federal government, at some level, is also aware of what is known and what is not known. Not everything is known, right? Because there has to be plausible deniability here regarding the hierarchy ladder. So, in regards to some of the more successful operations, did the intelligence services know? Well, I did a number of videos about the intelligence apparatuses involving the 1998 East Africa bombings, as well as, of course, ad nauseum, the 9/11 attacks. In regards to 1993 World Trade Center bombings, go to DJ Thermal Detonator for that. He's the best. And other people have been covering pre-intelligence warnings, Robbie Martin, Ryan Dawson, and now Darren Harvey, who's a new guy and basically making waves now. And there's others, podcasts from New American Century, a new podcast that basically are talking about these issues. And it's unfortunate, very few people, Ray Nowolski is another, very few people are reporting on this currently. And this is the backbreak. This is it. This is the essence of the September 11th attacks, is pre-intelligence. What was known and what was not known.
And the first point in that regard would be intelligence reporting on Bin Laden's intentions to strike inside the United States.
Yeah, that's the August 6th PDB, the Presidential Daily Brief, which was basically intel that came from the interrogation of Ahmed Rassam, who was behind the Millennium bombing plots, who was in Afghanistan and met some terrorist operatives like the alleged 20th hijacker, Zacharias Moussaoui.
Central to the September 11th plot was Osama bin Laden's idea of carrying out a terrorist operation within the United States. It has been suggested that prior to September 11th, 2001, information available to the intelligence community had, for the most part, pointed to a terrorist threat against U.S. interests abroad. Our review confirmed that shortly after Osama bin Laden's May 1998 press conference, the intelligence community began to acquire intelligence information indicating that bin Laden's network intended to strike within the United States. These intelligence reports, which I'll go through in a minute, should be understood in their proper context. First, they generally did not contain specific information as to where, when, and how a terrorist attack might occur. And
that we know of, right? Okay. I would submit to you, and this is speculation, that the NSA knew. I'm pretty sure they were talking about the plane's operation on the phone. So
they are not corroborated by further information. Second, these reports represented a small percentage of the threat information that the intelligence community obtained during this period, most of which pointed to the possibility of attacks against U.S. interests overseas. Nonetheless, there was a modest but relatively steady stream of intelligence information indicating the possibility of terrorist attacks within the United States. Third,
that's not a secret, by the way. Yeah, Eleanor is right. But I mean, come on, man. You're trying to minimize the guilt here of certain intelligence services. I mean, I know that nobody's going to get blamed for this. And that was the opening statement of co-chair Porter Goss, co-chair of the Joint House Inquiry, where he basically said, we're not here to blame any specific agency. I mean, that's the same with the 9/11 Commission. Nobody got the blame for that. Yeah, there might be a stern talking to, but nobody got fired from it. They should have been. Some of these people should have been tried at The Hague for ignorance, if that was a crime, or for gross negligence and malfeasance at the very least. Should have been fired for that. And George Tenet, basically the DCI, Michael Hayden, director of the NSA. Jeez. And God knows who the Israelis and Saudi
credibility of the
what they knew.
Sources providing this information was sometimes questionable. While one could not, as a result, give too much credence to some individual reports, the totality of the information in the body of reporting clearly reiterated a consistent and critically important theme: bin Laden's intent to launch terrorist attacks inside the United States. And I will summarize several of these reports. And I should stress again, these are in declassified versions. They have been declassified. In June 1998, the intelligence community obtained information from several sources that bin Laden was considering attacks in the United States, including Washington, D.C. and New York. This information was provided to senior U.S. government officials in July 1998. In August 1998,
Hey, wait a minute. I can't believe no one's bringing up the Bajinka plot. Listen, 1996, the Philippines investigators led by Rodolfo Mendoza interrogated Abdul Hakim Arad, who was caught going back for his laptop when they were mixing chemicals in a room at the Josefa apartment hotel. And Ramzi Youssef and Abdul Hakim Arad had to run because the chemicals and the smoke was coming out the windows. Everybody thought there was a fire. Policemen, firemen got there. Ramsey told him go back for the laptop, and unbelievably, Abdul Hakim Arad went back for the laptop because it had all the information about the plot. He was captured and he was detained, and basically they, Philippines investigators interrogated him harshly, and he told him about the plot. He told him about an extension of that plot, which was basically that there were operators inside the United States that were going to hijack planes, and multiple planes at that. So that's 96. It's 2 years prior to 98, your reports. Why isn't this brought up by you? Why is this forgotten altogether?
98. The intelligence community obtained information that a group of unidentified Arabs planned to fly an explosive-laden plane from a foreign country into the World Trade Center. The information was passed to the FBI and the FAA. The FAA found the plot highly unlikely, given the state of that foreign country's aviation program. Moreover, they believed that a flight originating outside the United States would be detected before it reached its intended target inside the United States. The FBI's New York office took no action on the information, filing the communication in the office's bombing repository file. The intelligence community has acquired additional information since then, indicating there may be links between this group and other terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda. In September 1998, the intelligence community prepared a memorandum detailing Al-Qaeda infrastructure in the United States, including the use of fronts for terrorist activities. This information.
This is most likely from an informant from Al-Qaeda, the first informant named Jamal al-Fadl, who was basically one of the co-founders of Al-Qaeda. That's how far back he went, and basically gave pertinent, valuable information to the FBI regarding the hierarchy of Al-Qaeda and what they're about, including their operational systems that were operating within it. There's a military committee, a widows committee, a shura committee, which is a religious committee, or they aren't pious Muslims, by an example, but they're extremists. But yeah, there's committees within Al-Qaeda. There's a structure to it. But Jamal al-Fadl gave them all that information, and that was one of the reasons for the indictment of Osama Bin Laden in, I want to say 99. Or 98, 99.
Provided to senior U.S. government officials in September 1998. In September 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that bin Laden's next operation would possibly involve flying an aircraft loaded with explosives into a U.S. airport and detonating it. This information was provided to senior U.S. government officials in late 1998. In October 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that Al-Qaeda was trying to establish an operative cell within the United States. This information indicated there might be an effort underway to recruit U.S. citizen Islamists and U.S.-based expatriates from the Middle East and North Africa. In the fall of 1998, the intelligence community received information concerning a Bin Laden plot involving aircraft in the New York and Washington, D.C. areas. In November 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that a Bin Laden terrorist cell was attempting to recruit a group of 5 to 7 young men from the United States to travel to the Middle East for training. This was in conjunction with planning to strike U.S. domestic targets. In November 1998, the intelligence community received information that Bin Laden and senior associates had agreed to allocate reward money for the assassinations of 4 top intelligence agency officers. The bounty for each assassination was $9 million. The bounty was in response to the U.S. announcement of an increase in the reward money for information leading to the arrest of Bin Laden. In the spring of 1999, the intelligence community obtained information about a planned Bin Laden attack on a U.S. government facility in Washington, D.C. In August 1999, the intelligence community obtained information that Bin Laden's organization had decided to target the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and the Director of Central Intelligence. Target was interpreted by intelligence community analysts to mean assassinate. In September 1999, the intelligence community obtained information that Bin Laden and others were planning a terrorist act in the United States, possibly against specific landmarks in California and New York City. The reliability of the source of this information was unknown.
That's most likely coming from Ali Muhammad, who was actually a triple informant or a triple spy for the CIA, the FBI, and Bin Laden. And basically, you know, this goes all the way back to 93, even before that. And a former Egyptian army officer who served in the U.S. military here in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, basically went on multiple exploitations to Afghanistan. And this, you know, even his superiors at Fort Bragg couldn't believe that we have a, you know, here's a guy who basically is going to fight a foreign war while serving at the U.S. military. And that's when they figured out that, hey, this guy probably has connections to the Central Intelligence Agency. Massive connections with 1993, massive connections with Omar Abdul Rahman, the blind sheikh, and the Masjid al-Salam Mosque, where he preached at, Al-Farouk Mosque, which was located in Brooklyn, which became under the umbrella of the Central Intelligence Agency through Operation Cyclone, where hundreds of millions of dollars went through funding the Mujahideen against the Soviets in Afghanistan. These people came back to their respective homes in their respective countries and continued the war on the United States and their interests, and that had nothing to do with women with short skirts, or that we were secularists or Christians. Had everything to do with our foreign policy, which creates a lot of these monsters.
In late 1999, the intelligence community obtained information regarding the Bin Laden network's possible plans to attack targets in Washington, D.C. and New York City during the New Year's Millennium celebrations. On December 14, 1999, an individual named Ahmed Rassam was arrested as he attempted to enter the United States from Canada. An alert U.S. Customs Service officer in Port Washington stopped Rassam and asked to search his vehicle. Chemicals and detonator materials were found in his car. Rassam's intended target was Los Angeles International Airport. In February 2000, the intelligence community obtained information that Bin Laden was making plans to assassinate U.S. intelligence officials, including the director of the FBI. In March 2000, the intelligence community obtained information regarding the types of targets that operatives in Bin Laden's network might strike. The Statue of Liberty was specifically mentioned, as were skyscrapers, ports, airports, and nuclear power plants. In March 2000, the intelligence community obtained information indicating bin Laden was planning attacks in specific West Coast areas, possibly involving the assassination of several public officials. The intelligence community had concerns that this information might have come from a source known to fabricate information. And in April 2001, the intelligence community obtained information from a source with terrorist connections who speculated that bin Laden would be interested in commercial pilots as potential terrorists. The source warned that the United States should not focus only on embassy bombings, that terrorists sought, quote, spectacular and traumatic, close quote, attacks, and that the first World Trade Center bombing would be the type of attack that would be appealing. The source did not mention a time frame for any attack. Because the source was offering personal speculation and not hard information, the information was not disseminated within the intelligence community. Bin Laden's declaration of war in 1998 and intelligence reports indicating possible terrorist plots inside the United States did not go unnoticed by the intelligence community, which in turn advised senior officials in the U.S. government of the serious nature of the threat. The staff has also reviewed documents other than individual intelligence reports that demonstrate that at least at senior levels, the intelligence community understood that bin Laden posed a serious threat to the domestic United States. Here are 5 examples. A December 1st, 1998 intelligence community assessment of Osama bin Laden read in part, and I quote, "UBL is actively planning against U.S. targets. Multiple reports indicate UBL is keenly interested in striking the U.S. on its own soil. Al-Qaeda is recruiting operatives for attacks in the U.S., but has not yet identified potential targets." On December 4th, 1998, in a memorandum to his deputies at the CIA, the Director of Central Intelligence summed up the situation in this way, quote, "We must now enter a new phase in our effort against bin Laden. Our work to date has been remarkable and in some instances heroic, yet each day we all acknowledge that retaliation is inevitable and that its scope may be far larger than we have previously experienced. We are at war. I want no resources or people spared in this effort, either inside CIA or the community."
That's the DCI George Tenet. And the outline was called The Plan, drafted by Cofer Black, head of the Counterterrorism Center.
A classified document signed by a senior U.S. government official in December 1998 read in part, quote, "The intelligence community has strong indications that bin Laden intends to conduct or sponsor attacks inside the United States." In June 1999 testimony before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and in a July 1999 briefing to House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence staffers, the chief of the CTC described reports that bin Laden and his associates were planning attacks in the United States. And a classified document signed by a senior U.S. government official in July 1999 characterized bin Laden's February 1998 statement as, quote, "a de facto declaration of war," close quote, on the United States. What is less clear is the extent to which other parts of the government, as well as the American people, understood and fully appreciated the gravity and the immediacy of the threat. For example, officials at the National Security Agency whom we have interviewed were aware of DCI Tenet's December 1998 declaration that the intelligence community was at war with bin Laden. On the other hand, relatively few of the FBI agents interviewed by the Joint Inquiry staff seem to have been aware of DCI Tenet's declaration.
And that's because the CIA doesn't tell really the FBI basically anything of importance. And that goes back many, many years, interagency fighting. Um, Most notably, Michael Scheuer, the first chief of station of Alex Station, had vehement disagreements and even vehemently hated John O'Neill, headed the Bin Laden unit in New York City, the counterterrorism unit anyway, for the FBI, because the both of them were considered the best in the country when it came to Arab fundamentalism. And Scheuer was quite egotistical, and so was John O'Neill.
There was also considerable variation in the degree to which FBI-led Joint Terrorism Task Forces, or JTTFs, prioritized and coordinated field efforts targeting bin Laden and al-Qaeda. While the FBI's New York office was the lead office in the vast majority of counterterrorism investigations concerning bin Laden, many other FBI offices around the country were unaware of the magnitude of the threat. There are also indications that the allocation of intelligence community resources after the DCI's December 1998 declaration did not adequately reflect a true war effort against bin Laden. In 1999, the CTC had only 3 analysts assigned full-time to bin Laden's terrorist network worldwide. After 2000, but before September 11, 2001, that number had risen to 5. On a broader scale, our review has found little evidence prior to September 11th of a sustained national effort to mobilize public awareness and to harden the homeland against a potential assault by bin Laden within the United States, with the possible exception of a heightened focus on weapons of mass destruction. The second point that I want to cover is strategic warning, indications of a possible terrorist attack in the spring and summer of 2001. Let me briefly describe what we have found regarding the level and the nature of threat information that was obtained by the intelligence community during the spring and summer of 2001. During that time period, the community experienced a significant rise in information indicating that bin Laden and al-Qaeda intended to strike against United States interests in the very near future. Some individuals within the community have suggested that the increase in threat reporting was unprecedented, at least in terms of their own experience. While the reporting repeatedly predicted dire consequences for Americans, it did not provide actionable detail on when, where, and how specific attacks would occur.
And there's the problem, right? Unactionable intelligence. Now, we had intelligence, but most of it was not very detailed, vague intelligence, especially, like I said previously, in the year 2001, we had plenty of warnings about an attack that was going to be imminent inside the United States. We just didn't know where and when, allegedly. I'm willing to say some agencies certainly did within like I said, the NSA, CIA, and plus, the Saudis and Israelis, whatever intelligence they got, we'll never know because we deported a lot of those agents, and we'll never know what information they collected. But I mean, come on, man. There was enough warnings where we could have stricter security measures, like I said, for the FAA, for INS, for the state.
March.
No, you didn't want to.
And September 2001, the intelligence community detected numerous indicators of an impending terrorist attack, some of which pointed specifically to the United States as a possible target. In March 2001, an intelligence source claimed a group of bin Laden operatives were planning to conduct an unspecified attack in the United States in April 2001. One of the operatives allegedly resided within the United States. In April 2001, the intelligence community obtained information that unspecified terrorist operatives in California and New York State were planning a terrorist attack in those states for April. Between May and July, the National Security Agency reported at least 33 communications indicating a possible imminent terrorist attack. None of these reports provided any specific information on where, when, or how an attack might occur, nor was it clear that any of the individuals involved in these intercepted communications had any first-hand knowledge of where, when, or how an attack might occur. If they did know, it was not evident in the intercepts. These reports were widely disseminated within the intelligence community. In May 2001, the intelligence community obtained information that supporters of bin Laden were reportedly planning to infiltrate the United States via Canada in order to carry out a terrorist operation using high explosives. The report mentioned an attack within the United States, though it did not say where in the U.S. or when or how an attack might occur.
And let me also just bring up too, I mean, in the years prior to 9/11, you had operatives in Boston. One such particular individual, Nabil Maraba, basically was an Al-Qaeda associate who basically facilitated an attack on a U.S. warship prior to the USS Cobalt, by the way. And I think that's where the idea came from. He was a taxi driver. He traveled all around the country. He lived in Detroit, in Southwest. The FBI knew about him, knew that he had connections to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And there were other individuals linked with him that would later be arrested for their roles in conspiring to bomb or to commit terrorism inside the United States. And, you know, speaking of Canada, boy, is that quite the venue, a conduit between Europe and the United States with certain radical fundamentalists and their organizations, not just Al-Qaeda. And that goes back many years as well.
In July 2001, this information was shared with the FBI, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Customs Service, and the State Department, and was included in a closely held intelligence report for senior government officials in August 2001. In May 2001, the Department of Defense acquired and shared with other elements of the intelligence community information indicating that 7 individuals associated with bin Laden had departed various locations for Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States. In June 2001, the DCI's CTC had information that key operatives in Osama Bin Laden's organization were disappearing while others were preparing for martyrdom. In July 2001, the DCI's CTC was aware of an individual who had recently been in Afghanistan who had reported, quote, "Everyone is talking about an impending attack," close quote. The intelligence community was also aware that bin Laden had stepped up his propaganda efforts in the preceding months. On August 16, 2001, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the INS detained Zacarias Moussaoui. Prior to that date, in August 2001, Mr. Moussaoui's conduct had aroused suspicions about why he was learning to fly large commercial aircraft and had prompted the flight school he was attending in Minneapolis to contact the local FBI office. FBI agents believed that Moussaoui may have been intending to carry out a terrorist act. On August 23, 2001, the intelligence community requested that 2 individuals, Khalid al-Midhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, who had first come to the attention of the community in 1999 as possible associates of bin Laden's terrorist network, be added to the U.S. Department of State's watch list for
Why did it take 2 years? This was something that Carl Levin, a panelist at the Joint House Inquiry, asked the DCI Tenet, George Tenet, why was there such a long wait to put Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi on a watch list? And who was in charge of putting those names on a watch list? And Tenet says that he doesn't know the answer, right? He knew the answer. And why did the CIA not tell the FBI about both of them being inside the United States since January of 2000, at least January 5th, 2000, January 8th. January 15th of 2000. They knew about these guys in 99, withheld that information from the FBI and Department of State. Then when they came to the United States and the FBI saw the cable that these guys had US visas and they were involved with the US skull bombing, they tried to warn their superiors in Washington, D.C. The CIA told them, no, you can't share our information because it's not an FBI matter. And that's coming from the CIA. I'm not making that up. Intentionally withholding information all the way up until August of 2001. And even before then, you had CIA analysts from the Counterterrorism Center like Clark Shannon going to Washington, D.C., FBI headquarters, and showing FBI agent Steve Bongart, Dina Corsi, photos of Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. The FBI doesn't know who they are, and is asking him, hey, do you know who these people are in the photo? No. Why are you following them? I can't tell you that. Meanwhile, George Tenet basically says, he didn't tell me that. So Carl Levin, panelist, basically said, well, we've interviewed Clark Shannon behind closed doors, behind closed doors testimony. That's not available to the public because he gave classified information. And he told George Tenet something different. But it's George Tenet's fault because George Tenet told them don't share that information to the FBI because that's what Clark Shannon told the members of the Joint House. How about that one? Why?
Denying visas to individuals attempting to enter the United States. Working levels of INS and U.S. Customs had determined that at least one of them was likely in the United States, prompting FBI headquarters to request searches for them in both New York and Los Angeles. The FBI's New York field office unsuccessfully searched for al-Mihdhar and al-Hazmi. The FBI's Los Angeles office received the search request on September 11, 2001. In late summer 2001, the intelligence community obtained information that an individual associated with al-Qaeda was considering mounting terrorist operations within the United States. There was no information available as to the timing of possible attacks or the alleged targets. And on September 10, 2001, NSA intercepted 2 communications between individuals abroad suggesting imminent terrorist activity. These communications were not translated into English and disseminated until September 12, 2001. These intercepts did not provide any indication of where or what activities might occur. Despite these indicators of a possible terrorist attack inside the United States, during the course of interviews, the Joint Inquiry staff was told that it was the general view of the U.S. intelligence community in the spring and summer of 2001 that an attack on U.S. interests was more likely to occur overseas. Individuals in the intelligence community pointed to intelligence information.
Even though we had intelligence in the mid-90s that suggests that targets were also likely inside the United States. Even the August 6th presidential daily brief, in which Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice tried to misquote the headline, Bin Laden determined to strike the United States. She said, no, the headline actually says Bin Laden determined to strike in the US, not the US. And she knew that. because then they will have to explain why wasn't there stricter security measures with all these intelligence warnings that Eleanor Hill is basically rattling off. Why wasn't there stricter security measures from the INS to the FAA? And if there were warnings about a terrorist attack using planes, why didn't the FAA in their annual security reports mention this? And if they did, why didn't they take the necessary steps to implement those guidelines? Nobody's held accountable for anything.
Arrest of suspected terrorists in the Middle East and Europe, and a credible report of a plan to attack a U.S. embassy in the Middle East as factors that shaped their thinking about where an attack was likely to occur. One senior FBI official said that based on the intelligence he was seeing, he thought there was a high probability, quote, 98%, close quote, that the attack would occur overseas. During the summer of 2001, the intelligence community was also disseminating information through appropriate channels to senior U.S. government officials about possible terrorist attacks. For example, in June 2001, the community issued a terrorist threat advisory warning U.S. government agencies that there was a high probability of an imminent terrorist attack against U.S. interests by Sunni extremists associated with Bin Laden's al-Qaeda organization. The advisory mentioned the Arabian Peninsula, Israel, and Italy as possible locations. According to the advisory, the community continued to believe that Sunni extremists associated with al-Qaeda are most likely to attempt spectacular attacks, resulting in numerous casualties. Subsequently, intelligence information provided to senior U.S. government leaders indicated that Bin Laden's organization expected near-term attacks to have dramatic consequences on governments or cause major casualties. A briefing prepared for senior government officials at the beginning of July 2001 contained the following language, quote, based on a review of all source reporting over the last 5 months, we believe that UBL will launch a significant terrorist attack against U.S. and/or Israeli interests in the coming weeks. The attack will be spectacular.
Yeah, let me bring this up. I always hear U.S. and Israeli interests. When was the last time U.S. Israeli interests were ever attacked? I mean, besides your local Hamas operative living in Jenin was bombing a pizzeria, okay? No Israeli interests. The last time was the Abu Nidal organization. Al-Qaeda never attacked any Israeli interests anywhere. Same thing for the Islamic State and the Levant. It's always US, the United States. It's always Europe or Asia, Southeast Asia mainly. You know, the second largest terrorist attack in the world, and which is often forgotten, is the Bali bombings in Indonesia that were carried out by members of Jemaah Islamiyah. I did a video about that, wrote an article about that too, and did a podcast about that. And they were affiliates of Bin Laden in Afghanistan. And they arrested a number of these people and they were executed for their crimes. It was a huge bomb too, huge bomb. Truck, 2 trucks. Bombed the bar, Patty's Bar, and bombed the Sari Club. And they thought there were going to be a lot of U.S. Military members there, because usually a lot of young men go to these hotspots, and they were going to attack them. But it was mostly Australians that were there. And they blamed them anyway because of their involvement with the invasion of Iraq I'm sorry, Afghanistan.
Killer.
A lot of warnings for these. Nothing was
And
acted.
designed to inflict mass casualties against U.S. facilities or interests. Attack preparations have been made. Attack will occur with little or no warning. Later, intelligence information provided to senior government leaders indicated that Bin Laden's organization continued to expect imminent attacks on U.S. interests. The Joint Inquiry Staff has been advised by a representative of the intelligence community that about a month later, in August 2001, a closely held intelligence report for senior government officials included information that Bin Laden had wanted to conduct attacks in the United States since 1997. The information included discussion of the arrest of Ahmed Rassan in December 1999 and the 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. It meant,
In which, by the way, there were intelligence warnings prior to that bombing as well, that there was going to be an attack on those embassies. In fact, Clarence Bushdell, I'm butchering the last name, who is an ambassador to Kenya, basically tried to warn the State Department to have stricter security measures. And when they did, they basically found out through their intelligence that, yes, this was basically a target for the attacks, but then, you know, those security measures weren't really strict anyway, and they were bombed.
that
And there was an informant, by the way, there was an informant involved with that operation that came out months prior and told the FBI about an attack on the embassies themselves, and they basically deported him, saying, yeah, we don't believe you anyway.
members of al-Qaeda, including some U.S. citizens, had resided or traveled in or traveled to the United States for years, and that the group apparently maintained a support structure here. The report cited uncorroborated information obtained in 1998 that Bin Laden wanted to hijack airplanes to gain the release of U.S.-held extremists, FBI judgments about patterns of activity consistent with preparations for hijacking.
That would be Omar Abdul Rahman, the blind sheikh, the leader of the emir of Gamma Islamiyah, an Egyptian Islamic fundamentalist group. There was also threat intelligence coming from an expat from Egypt who went to the CIA, basically said that Bin Laden approached him, and I forgot this guy's name, who said that because he knew he had a plane, and said, if you can act as a martyr, drive your plane into the palace of Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak. And I think that was in '99.
Or other types of attacks, and the number of Bin Laden-related investigations underway, as well as information acquired in May 2001 that indicated a group of Bin Laden supporters was planning attacks in the United States with explosives. In August 2001, based on information it had in its possession at the time, the CIA sent a message to the FAA asking the FAA to advise corporate security directors of U.S. air carriers of the following information. Quote, a group of 6 Pakistanis currently based in Bolivia may be planning to conduct a hijacking or possibly a bombing or an act of sabotage against a commercial airliner. While we have no details of the carrier, the date, or the location of this or these possibly planned actions, we have learned that the group has had discussions in which Canada, England, Malaysia, Cuba, South Africa, Mexico, Atlanta, New York, Madrid, Moscow, and Dubai have come up, and India and Islamabad have been described as possible travel destinations. Close quote. While this information was not related to an attack planned by al-Qaeda, it did alert the aviation community to the possibility that a hijacking plot might occur in the U.S. shortly before the September 11th attacks occurred. Now I want to turn to intelligence information on possible terrorist use of airplanes as weapons. Central to the September 11th attacks was the terrorist use of airplanes as weapons. In the aftermath of the attacks, there was much discussion about the extent to which our government was or could have been aware of the threat of terrorist attacks of this type, and the extent to which adequate precautions were taken to address the threat. Based on our review to date, we believe that the intelligence community was aware of the potential for this type of terrorist attack, but did not produce any specific assessments of the likelihood that terrorists would use airplanes as weapons. Our review has uncovered several examples of intelligence reporting on the possible use of airplanes as weapons in terrorist operations. In December 1994, Algerian armed Islamic group terrorists hijacked an Air France flight in Algiers and threatened to crash it into the Eiffel Tower. French authorities deceived the terrorists into thinking the plane did not have enough fuel to reach Paris and diverted it. A French anti-terrorist force stormed the plane and killed all 4 terrorists. In January 1995, a Philippine National Police raid turned up materials in a Manila apartment indicating that 3 individuals planned, among other things, to crash a plane into CIA headquarters. The Philippine National Police said that the same group was responsible for the bombing of a Philippine airliner on December 12, 1994. Information on the threat was passed to the FAA, which briefed U.S. and major foreign carriers. In January...
Okay, now that's news to me. All right, so basically, Rodolfo Mendoza would later on go on to say that these briefings, which were the interrogations of Abdul Hakim Murad, they went to the FBI as well, and they did nothing with it. I mean, look, if you knew, and by the way, we have Abdul Hakim Murad reports where they were going to hijack other planes and crash them into American targets, like I said before, and she doesn't mention this. I wonder why. Was that because that would be too far back, and we had enough time to make these security measures stricter? That could be it. Let's see what she has to say.
1996, the intelligence community obtained information concerning a planned suicide attack by individuals associated with Sheikh Omar Abd al-Rahman and a key al-Qaeda operative. The plan was to fly...
No, he's not part of al-Qaeda. He's Gamma Islamiyah, which is a lot different than al-Qaeda. He has no affiliations with al-Qaeda. And to my knowledge, he's never met bin Laden. And if you're part of al-Qaeda, that means you swear bayat, which is loyalty, Arabic for loyalty to bin Laden. And yeah, Blind Sheikh was not part of al-Qaeda.
To the United States from Afghanistan and attacked the White House. In October 1996, the intelligence community obtained information regarding an Iranian plot to hijack a Japanese plane over Israel and crash it into Tel Aviv. An individual would board the plane in the Far East. During the flight, he would commandeer the aircraft, order it to fly over Tel Aviv, and then crash the plane into the city. In 1997, one of the units at FBI headquarters became concerned about the possibility of a terrorist group using an unmanned aerial vehicle, UAV, for terrorist attacks. The FBI and CIA became aware of reporting that this group had purchased a UAV. At the time, the agency's view was that the only reason that this group would need a UAV would be for either reconnaissance or attack. There was more concern about the possibility of an attack outside the United States, for example, by flying the UAV into a U.S. embassy or a visiting U.S. delegation. As noted previously, in August '98, the intelligence community obtained information that a group of unidentified Arabs planned to fly an explosive-laden plane from a foreign country into the World Trade Center. Also noted previously, in September '98, the intelligence community obtained information that bin Laden's next operation could possibly involve flying an aircraft loaded with explosives into a U.S. airport and detonating it. In November 1998, the community obtained information that a Turkish Islamic extremist group had planned a suicide attack to coincide with celebrations marking the death of Ataturk. The conspirators, who were arrested, planned to crash an airplane packed with explosives into Ataturk's tomb during a government ceremony. The Turkish press said the group had cooperated with Osama bin Laden. The FBI's New York office included this incident in one of its Osama bin Laden databases. In February 1999, the intelligence community obtained information that Iraq had formed a suicide pilot unit that it planned to use against British and U.S. forces in the Persian Gulf. The CIA commented that this was highly unlikely and probably disinformation.
Yeah, you bet.
In March 1999,
Iraq doesn't, Iraq, which is Ba'athist, led by a Ba'athist government. And yeah, there might be some rogue Sunni extremists among the, the countrymen. It's not known to be a terrorist hotspot. Neither was Libya, neither is Lebanon. Yeah, Lebanon has Hezbollah, but that's a political movement, not so much as a Sunni extremist movement, not even Sunni, the Shia. These extremist movements come from primarily Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, the Gulf, also Turkey, Philippines, and Indonesia, where they have, and Pakistan, how could I forget them, where you have a high amount of Sunnis extremists, Wahhabis, they're called Salafis, okay? They come from this ideology created by the Hadith scholar Ibn Taymiyyah, and then later on extrapolated by a nomad called Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab, who created the foundations for Wahhabism, which created the country also once known as the Emirate of Diriyah, which was renamed to Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula. All right, that's where the foundations of this heretical, anti-ethical branch of Sunni, the Sunni faith, which is even criticized by Sunnis as being not remotely religious.
the intelligence community obtained information regarding a plan by an al-Qaeda member who was a U.S. citizen to fly a hang glider into the Egyptian presidential palace and then detonate the explosives he was carrying. The individual, who received hang glider training in the United States, brought the hang glider back to Afghanistan. In April 2000, the intelligence community obtained information regarding an alleged bin Laden plot to hijack a 747. The source, who was a walk-in to the FBI's Newark office, claimed that he had been to a training camp in Pakistan where he learned hijacking techniques and received arms training. He also stated that he was supposed to meet 5 to 6 other individuals in the United States who would also participate in the plot. They were instructed to use all necessary force to take over the plane because there would be pilots among the hijacking team. The plan was to fly the plane to Afghanistan, and if they could not make it there, that they were to blow up the plane. Although the individual passed an FBI polygraph, the FBI was never able to verify any aspect of his story or identify his contacts in the United States. And in August 2001, the intelligence community obtained information regarding a plot to either bomb the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi from an airplane or crash an airplane into it. The intelligence community learned that two people who were reportedly acting on instructions from Bin Laden met in October 2000 to discuss this plot. Despite these reports, the community did not produce any specific assessments of the likelihood that terrorists would use airplanes as weapons.
I don't know what else to tell you, my friend. I mean, there's plenty of evidence here to suggest, hey, wait a minute. You know, these guys are basically evolving with the waves of terrorism. We evolved from Abu Nidal to Osama Bin Laden. We evolved from Osama Bin Laden to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. We evolved from Zarqawi to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And all these terrorists have one thing in common. They didn't grow up very pious. They were petty crooks and criminals and drunks, and later on became international financiers of terrorism or conductors of terrorism. And basically, a lot of these are troubled youth, or youth are persuaded, primarily persuaded by US imperialism. And when I say US imperialism, most talk about Israel as well, and the kingdom of Ibn Saud, Saudi Arabia, in which, incidentally enough, even though the country is the founders of Wahhabism, the terrorist groups hate the kingdom because they see them as nothing but the prostitutes of the West, because they regulate the oil of the United States, of Saudi Arabia. So keep that in mind. You know, what Eleanor Hill is basically showing you is 3 years, 4 years of intelligence warnings, basically suggesting that Bin Laden and affiliates to Al-Qaeda wanted to attack not just US interests, but the US abroad and inside the country, and no security measures were taken for domestic agencies. That's the whole point of me playing this video to you, because the excuses, which you could see through the Joint House Inquiry 9/11 Commission, which I have uploaded, and if you don't want to see those, I have breakdown videos regarding certain agencies who basically said we didn't have enough prior warnings. Yes, you did. You had plenty enough. What you didn't have, allegedly, were specifics. But you had enough prior to 9/11 to basically implement stricter security measures for the border, for INS, for FAA, for local and state police, and federal authorities. You didn't do any of this until after 9/11, which is usually the case, right? An incident happens, then we got to take.
This may have been
measures.
driven in part by resource issues in the area of intelligence analysis. Prior to September 11th, 2001, the CTC had 40 analysts to analyze terrorism issues worldwide, with only one of the 5 branches focused on terrorist tactics. Prior to September 11th, 2001, the only terrorist tactic on which the CTC performed strategic analysis was the possible use of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons, because there were more obvious potential for mass casualties. At the FBI, prior to September 11th, 2001, support for ongoing investigations and operations was favored in terms of resources over long-term strategic analysis. We were told during the course of our FBI interviews that prevention occurred in the operational units, not through strategic analysis, and that prior to September 11th, the FBI had insufficient resources to do both. We were also told that the FBI's Al-Qaeda-related analytic expertise had been, quote, gutted, close quote, by transfers to operational units.
Isn't that something? You would think of all the agencies around the world, the FBI in New York, which was a prior incident of terrorism back in '93, would have the most in terms of funding to analytical, technical, and physical data or physical capabilities, analytical capabilities, and operational capabilities. You would think that the World Trade Center, which was for years and years prior to 9/11, always a target for terrorism, that the FBI in New York would have a blank check, so to speak, from the federal government or even from New York. But no, after 93, what did the FBI do? James Fox, Louis Freeh? No, they gutted the FBI and basically said, well, there is no existing terrorist cells in the country. When you have a fireman named Ronnie Bucca, go watch Pajinka Maxim, DJ Dominetti's film, basically a fireman even realizing, hey, wait a minute, there's a bigger operational cell inside the United States. And then when he created his own cache of information, tried to give it to the FBI, they ignored him. He wasn't alone. You had certain FBI guys like Jack Clunan and Frank Pellegrino, John Antisov, Louis Napoli, who basically knew that there was a problem inside the country regarding Arab fundamentalism, links with the blind Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, but they didn't know too much about Bin Laden. In 96, they did, because the CIA, they asked the CIA, hey, by the way, do you know anything about this guy, Osama Bin Laden? Well, they brought over 40 thick binders. That's what was reported, 40 binders. That's many years prior to 96. Yeah, they had information on Bin Laden, all right, but they ain't telling everybody nothing. Like I said before, yeah, there's plenty of non-operational intelligence and non-actionable intelligence, plenty of that. Where's the actionable intelligence? And if there is any, what's the use of having these agencies in the first place? Huh? Or do we go down a more nefarious route and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe they know something and they ain't telling us everything. And why is that? You know, I can't prove it, but I think the NSA and the CIA damn well knew. So did Israel and so did Saudi Arabia intelligence that these attacks, September 11th, was going to happen. And they didn't share this with the FBI or with the Department of State or with local authorities, because it would benefit foreign governments as well as the Pentagon and certain people in the State Department to expand on the military, to expand on presidential authority, to expand on the intelligence services like the NSA and the CIA. Regarding signals and human intelligence all around the world. Isn't that what we saw after 9/11? Isn't that what's happening at the current moment? We invaded who? Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, parts of Pakistan, Yemen, we're bombing. We're helping to bomb. And yeah, we decimated Al Qaeda for sure. Arrested a lot of them. Why aren't they on trial? Is it because we tortured some folks? Yeah, because now we don't know what is true and what isn't. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed said he's guilty for 9/11. How can we really know? He was tortured. Would you say anything if you were tortured? And if he's telling the truth, how would we know? How can we discern that he was telling the truth under duress or telling the truth under duress?
And that as a result, the FBI's analytic unit had only one individual working on al-Qaeda at the time of the September 11 attacks. While focused strategic analysis was lacking, the subject of aviation-related terrorism was included in some broader terrorist threat assessments, such as the National Intelligence Estimates on Terrorism. For example, the 1995 NIE on terrorism cited the consideration the Bojinka conspirators gave to attacking CIA headquarters with an aircraft. The document contained the following language. Our review of the evidence suggests that the conspirators were guided in their selection of the method and venue of attack by carefully studying security procedures in place in the region. If terrorists operating in this country, the United States, are similarly methodical, they will identify serious vulnerabilities in the security system for domestic flights. The 1997 update to that report on terrorism included the following language. Civil aviation remains a particularly attractive target in light of the fear and publicity the downing of an airliner would evoke and the revelations last summer of the U.S. air transport sector's vulnerabilities. In a December 2000 report, the FBI and the FAA published a classified assessment that suggested less concern about the threat to domestic aviation. Quote, FBI investigations confirm domestic and international terrorist groups operating within the United States, but do not suggest evidence of plans to target domestic civil aviation. Terrorist activity within the U.S. has focused primarily on fundraising, recruiting new members, and disseminating propaganda. While international terrorists have conducted attacks on U.S. soil, these acts represent anomalies in their traditional targeting, which focuses on U.S. interests overseas. After September 11, 2001,
because if you're focusing overseas, you're not focusing here at home. And there's plausible deniability right there, one avenue anyway, a plausible deniability. Oh, we had no idea they were coming to the United States. Meanwhile, you have prior warnings from even people who were linked to or associates of fanatical fundamentalists in these groups like Al-Qaeda, right, and affiliates thereof, associates thereof. And, you know, there was, again, there was no secret that they wanted to attack inside the country too. And yes, it's in the Bojinka report, dossier. The Philippines investigator, like I said, Rodolfo Mendoza, told this to the FBI. That's under Director Louis Freeh.
I
don't know what else to tell you.
The CIA belatedly acknowledged some of the information that was available and had been available regarding the use of airplanes as weapons. A draft analysis dated November 19, 2001, entitled The September 11 Attacks, a Preliminary Assessment, states, "We do not know the process by which bin Laden and his lieutenants decided to hijack planes with the idea of flying them into buildings in the United States. But the idea of hijacking planes for suicide attacks had long been current in jihadist circles. For example, GIA terrorists from Algeria had planned to crash an Air France jet into the Eiffel Tower in December 1994, and Ramzi Youssef, a participant in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, planned to explode 12 U.S. jetliners in midair over the Pacific in the mid-1990s. Likewise, the World Trade Center had long been a target of terrorist bombers. Despite the intelligence available in recent years, our review to date has found no indications that prior to September 11, analysts in the intelligence community were cataloging information regarding the use of airplanes as weapons as a terrorist tactic, sending requirements to collectors to look for additional information on this threat, or considering the likelihood that Osama Bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, or any other terrorist group would attack the United States or U.S. interests in this way.
Wow. Again, from former senior executive Thomas Drake, not me saying this. He said that the NSA had collected so much metadata, more than any agency in the world, that they alone, outside of any agency, could have stopped 9/11 altogether from happening if they just shared it with anyone else. I rest my case here. There was enough warnings. Now, later on, later in this joint inquiry, I've done videos about Code for Black, head of the CTC of the CIA, DCI tenant Tom Wilshire, the deputy chief, second in command of the Bin Laden issue station, codename Alex Station. And they all gave conflicting testimony about, we gave prior warnings to the FBI about two operatives, Al-Qaeda operatives inside the United States, Khalid al-Badr, Nawaf Hazmi, who would later help to hijack American 977 that crashed in the Pentagon. And the FBI said, no, we never did. So they lied there. And, the CIA hoarded the information. By the way, like I said before, many other videos, when the cable came in that these two men, Khalid al-Badr and Nawaf Hazmi, were coming to the United States on U.S. visas, you had over 50 to 55 people in the CIA who knew about this cable. What did tenants say? Nobody read that cable in the March timeframe. He lied under oath. Why? Right? Why? Why did he lie? Why did George Tenet lie about that? That's the question that needs to be answered.
Mr. Chairman, our purpose this morning was to report on the information that the intelligence community possessed prior to September 11th, 2001, about terrorist attacks of the kind America witnessed on that fateful day. In closing, let me just say that for all of us who have been conducting this review, the task has been and continues to be not only a daunting one, but in all respects a sobering one. We are ever mindful that lost lives and shattered families were the catalyst for this inquiry. We know, as I have heard Ms. Pelosi say many times, that we are on sacred ground. We also have come to know from our review of the intelligence reporting the depth and the intensity of the enemy's hatred for this country and the relentless zeal with which it targeted American lives. We understand not only the importance, but also the enormity of the task facing the intelligence community. As my statement this morning suggests, the community made mistakes prior to September 11th, and the problems that led to those mistakes need to be addressed and they need to be fixed. On the other hand, the vengeance and the inhumanity that we saw on that day were not mistakes for Osama Bin Laden and for others like him. The responsibility for September 11th remains squarely on the shoulders of the terrorists who planned and participated in the attacks.
I think I can end it right there. You know what? We've seen it. It's near the end anyway. Look, we could take away a number of things right here. One, we had so many warnings prior to 9/11 about Bin Laden wanting to attack the United States. Two, we had enough information where we could have implemented stricter security measures in the domestic homeland of the United States, not just abroad, but here in the homeland, regarding border security through the INS, regarding airline security with the FAA, regarding federal guidelines regarding certain countries that have been a hotspot for terrorism, stricter security measures with like I said, with border security, and also with the immigration of not just inside the United States, but in countries like Saudi Arabia, but the opposite happened. We had a Visa Express program, Saudi Arabia. No, none of these warnings were heeded. In fact, when they went to these agencies, they basically just ignored it. And why? Why didn't they take stricter security measures? Because we never saw a hijacking, multiple hijacking before in our country's history. Never happened before, especially with radical fundamentalists. And there was enough prior warnings. We had enough people that were involved with some of these jihadist groups in the 90s that tried to warn, even from the FBI too, that tried to warn their superiors about, hey, listen, Bin Laden is seeking to attack using airliners. And this was all ignored altogether. Even information wasn't shared among with each agency. And that's the big, we could prove that. Now, reason is why. The real reasons. Why? Well, the CIA lied about it. And the commission and the Joint House barely said a word to the NSA about the two most important operations on the face of the earth: signals intelligence of Bin Laden's satellite phone and the Al-Qaeda communications hub in Yemen, house in Yemen. What were they talking about on those phones? Because they were talking about operations like 9/11, why wasn't that shared? If they weren't talking about 9/11 operation at all, then we could say that the government facilitated 9/11. Because they weren't talking about 9/11 on these phones or anywhere else on any listening device, then they weren't involved. And these are the questions we got to ask. And until we get enough people asking them, no one's going to take any interest in them. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.